The sound of the sea and the silence of Alice. The wind blew hard off the sea that morning. The ancient windows of Alice's house rattled, and the smell of salt seeped through the cracks, mingling with the gentle aroma of freshly baked bread. It was always like this. Before leaving for work, she did something simple that kept her at peace. Baking bread. No one understood why. No one knew that for her, that gesture was a silent conversation with the past. Jack, the next-door neighbor, saw this as eccentricity. To him, Alice was strange, a solitary, soft-spoken woman with eyes always fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Jack laughed about this with his friends on the porch, making comments that, although they seemed harmless, cut deep into the hearts of those who heard them. Alice pretended not to hear. She walked along the beach every morning before sunrise, with a blue scarf in her hair and a small notebook in her hands. I wrote something at every step, and sometimes I stopped to look at the sea, not as someone who admires it, but as someone who seeks answers. The townspeople thought she was weird, that she lived in a world of her own. But no one knew Alice was keeping a secret that, if it came to light, would explain every silence, every restrained smile, and every distant look. Jack, on the other hand, had a noisy life. He liked to be the center of attention, to make jokes, to appear like the most confident man in the neighborhood. But at night, when the lights in the house went out, he too had his emptiness, memories he preferred to hide under layers of arrogance. That morning, something different happened. Alice dropped her notebook on the sand without realizing it. The wind turned the pages until one of them came to rest right at Jack's feet, who was walking absent-mindedly. When he looked, he saw something that made him stop. There was a sentence written in delicate, shaky handwriting, as if it had been written with tears. Not all who remain silent do so out of weakness. Some have simply shouted enough. Jack stood still. For the first time, he felt a strange discomfort, a kind of guilt he couldn't name. He picked up the notebook and looked around, but Alice had already disappeared into the dunes. That phrase didn't leave his head for the rest of the day. And at night, when he saw the lights off in the house next door, he thought about knocking on the door, returning the notebook, maybe apologizing. But pride got the better of him. He left the notebook on the wall and went back inside, trying to convince himself it meant nothing. Only it meant that mysterious woman whom he so ridiculed carried a pain that he began to sense, a pain that mingled with the sound of the waves and the silence that hung between the two houses. That night, the wind blew differently, and for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't laugh. He stared out the window at the sea, wondering what was behind Alice's sad eyes. Little did he know that, inside that house, the true reason for his silence was about to be revealed, and it would change not only the way he saw her, but also the way he saw himself. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. The tides of everyday life. The days in the small coastal town had their own rhythm, marked by the tides and the seagulls that crossed the sky at dawn. Alice lived alone, in the blue wooden house she'd inherited from her parents. The walls held stories that time insisted on whispering, and she listened to each one as if listening to an ancient song. I worked at the local library, an old building with tall windows and the smell of damp books. There, silence was her refuge. The pages turned carefully, the soft sound of pencils marking notes. It was the perfect world for someone who had heard too much and preferred the stillness of words. Every morning, she arrived before the others, opened the windows, and let the sea breeze in. The sound of the waves was the only thing that reminded her that she was still alive. Still, Alice smiled, a small but genuine smile, as if telling herself that survival was also a form of courage. Jack, meanwhile, could see the library from his office window. He worked in a boat shop, selling equipment and repairing engines. The routine was noisy, full of customers and idle chatter, but he enjoyed it. He felt part of the city's hustle and bustle. Still, every time he saw Alice crossing the street in her simple dress and her hair tied up, something disconcerted him. He didn't understand why, but there was something about her that made him uneasy. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the serenity she maintained, even in the face of his laughter and the other people's nasty comments. Jack wasn't cruel, just too insecure to admit that he felt small around someone who didn't have anything to prove. That week, the city was preparing for the summer festival when everyone gathered in the main square to celebrate the arrival of high tides. Jack was assigned to help with the preparations, and to his surprise, so was Alice. When he saw her at the decorations tent, his first impulse was to make a joke, but she disarmed him with a simple gesture. She handed him a box of dried flowers and said in a calm voice and with a distant look in her eyes that they were for the event tables. Jack was speechless. For once, he couldn't find anything funny to say. He felt a strange desire to understand that woman, to know what lay behind so much stillness. In the days that followed, they worked side by side. Alice spoke little, but her presence was serene, almost therapeutic. She seemed to see the world from the inside, while Jack still only saw it from the outside. When the festival arrived, the town was filled with music, laughter, and the sweet smell of caramel corn. Jack looked around and noticed that Alice was not among the crowd. He walked to the beach and found her sitting alone, looking at the sea, with the same notebook in her hands. He approached slowly, not knowing what to say. The sound of the waves filled the silence between them, and for a moment Jack felt as if they were connected by something invisible, as if life were trying to teach him how to truly look at someone. Alice noticed his presence but didn't turn around. He simply said in a low voice that the sea held all the truths that people tried to hide. Jack didn't understand the meaning, but those words stayed with him for days. As the city returned to its routine, he began to observe it with different eyes. He noticed how she discreetly helped her elderly neighbors, how she cared for an abandoned cat, how she left flowers at the gate of a sick woman's house. All in silence, always in silence. And it was in this calm and repetitive daily life that Jack began to change, without realizing it. He started arriving at work earlier, listening more and talking less. But I still didn't have the courage to apologize. The guilt grew silently, like a tide about to overflow. He sensed that Alice was hiding something deep, something that would explain her melancholy gaze and her solitary walks by the sea. And soon he would find out. But before that, fate still had some lessons to teach, both to him and to her. Between silence and wind, summer stretched lazily over the seaside town. The mornings were full of light, and the smell of the sea permeated everything, the clothes, the houses, even the dreams. Alice walked along the beach every day, always at the same time, as if fulfilling a secret ritual. Jack, from his window, began to realize that he had been waiting for this moment. The soft sound of her footsteps on the sand, the blue scarf dancing in the wind. There was something there that calmed him. It was as if the simple act of seeing her reminded him that life could be quieter, truer. One day, he met her at the local grocery store. Alice held a small basket of dried fruit and flowers, and when Jack offered to help, she just smiled without responding. That smile, brief, almost shy, stayed in his mind for the rest of the day. Little by little, the two began to cross paths more. On the main street, at the fair, at the library. And although they exchanged few words, something invisible was forming between them. A kind of silent understanding, the kind of bond that needs no promises or explanations. Jack couldn't explain why, but he began to notice things he had never noticed before. The simple details, the small gestures that previously went unnoticed. The sound of the church bell at noon, the laughter of the children playing near the pier, the scent of the flowers that Alice placed on the windowsill. It was as if her presence had changed the way he saw the world, and in a way, it really has changed. Jack began to avoid his friends' cruel jokes, their laughter at others' expense. They noticed the change, but they didn't understand it. To them, Alice remained the strange neighbor. To Jack, she was beginning to become a tender mystery. One afternoon, he passed by her house and saw the door ajar. He knocked hesitantly. Alice appeared with her hair down, different, and a tired look. Jack asked if everything was okay. She simply said yes, but her voice betrayed something else. He noticed the interior of the house, old paintings, stacked books, and on the table several folded letters, as if someone had written them but never sent them. There was also a framed photograph, a younger, smiling woman, arm in arm with a man in uniform. Jack recognized her face. It was Alice, many years ago. Instinctively, he looked away. He felt that that moment was not his, but something touched him deeply. That loneliness seemed to have ancient roots, too deep to explain. In the following days, Jack tried to continue his life normally, but every time the wind blew in from the sea, he remembered her expression, and something inside him pushed him to understand, even if he didn't know how. Meanwhile, Alice also noticed the change. He noticed the gentler way Jack spoke, the calmer look in his eyes when they passed each other. She knew something was changing, not just in him, but within herself. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with any real attention. One morning, Alice arrived at the library and found a flower on the counter. It was simple, wrapped in plain paper, but there was a note. Sometimes silence says what words cannot. There was no name, but she knew who it came from. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears. He put the flower back in his notebook and took a deep breath. Perhaps, he thought, the world still had room for small acts of kindness. That night, Jack watched the light on in Alice's house and felt something new. Respect. Not the forced kind, but the kind born of true understanding. Respect for someone who survived pain and still remained kind. The relationship between the two was transformed without words. And like the tides that never stop coming back, the feelings began to find their own way. But the sea holds secrets, and the following week, an unexpected discovery would make Jack realize that Alice's silence hid much more than he could have imagined. It was something that would touch the past and change the course of both their lives forever. What the sea hides. The ocean wind changed direction that week. The air was colder, the sea rougher, and somehow Jack felt something stirring inside him too, a restlessness he couldn't name. Ever since the day he saw the flower disappear from the library counter, he couldn't stop thinking about Alice. It wasn't passion. It was something deeper, almost spiritual. It was the need to understand what was behind that silence that haunted him even in his dreams. He began to notice details he hadn't noticed before, the way Alice avoided questions about the past. As always, she walked to the end of the pier at dusk and stood there, looking at the sea until the last ray of sunlight disappeared. It was as if he was waiting for someone to come back. One afternoon, on an impulse, Jack followed her from afar. He watched as she knelt down near the rocks and placed something in the water. It looked like a small wooden box. The gesture was delicate, almost sacred. Then she stood there for long minutes, motionless, until the wind began to blow harder. Jack approached, not knowing what to say. Alice turned slowly, surprised but not angry. He tried to speak, but the words were lost in the noise of the waves. She just said it was okay and walked back without explaining anything. In the following days, that scene wouldn't leave his mind. What was in that box? What was she hiding from the world, and perhaps from herself? Driven by curiosity and an old feeling of guilt, Jack went to the library. He waited until closing time when she had already left and went in to return an old book he had never read. As he approached the counter, he saw on the table the notebook that Alice always carried with her. The cover was worn, stained with salt. He hesitated, but something made him open it. Perhaps the desire to understand, perhaps the need to redeem himself. In the first pages he found small notes, poems, reflections, but on one of the last sheets there was a name, Addison Carter, and just below, a date, March 14th, 2018. Jack felt his heart tighten. That name was familiar. Addison Carter had been a local fisherman who disappeared at sea 7 years ago during a storm that took his boat and 2 other men. All were presumed dead. Suddenly, everything made sense. The sunset walks, the lost gaze, the letters that were never sent. Alice was not just a lonely woman. She was a widow. A woman who waited for the sea to return what it had taken. Jack closed the notebook slowly, overcome by a weight he had never felt before. He left the library without looking back, his heart full of regret. The jokes, the mockery, the indifference, it all sounded cruel now. That night, he couldn't sleep. The sound of the waves seemed different, as if the sea was also accusing him. He wanted to apologize, but the words seemed too small compared to everything he had discovered. In the following days, Jack began to go to the pier at the same time as Alice used to. I would stay there, alone, looking at the sea, trying to understand how someone could live with such a great absence. Until one day, she appeared. She didn't seem surprised to see him. He just stood beside him, silent. And for a few minutes, they said nothing. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky orange and gold. Jack felt the urge to say he knew, that he had read the notebook, that he was sorry for everything. But before she could speak, Alice murmured that the sea sometimes gave back what it took away, not with the hands, but with the eyes of those who learned to look again. Jack didn't understand right away, but he felt it. Those words seemed to pierce him, and in that moment he realized that perhaps forgiveness was not something to be asked for, but something to be offered from the heart. That night, he returned home with a new feeling that his life would never be the same again. And he was right. What he would soon discover would change everything he thought about Alice, about the sea, and about the very meaning of starting over. What remained in the waves, the following days brought a strange calm. The wind died down, the waves seemed gentler, and even the city, so noisy in summer, was silent. Jack felt like everything was about to change, but he didn't know what yet. He saw Alice every morning, walking along the beach with the same blue scarf. Sometimes she would stop, bend down, and write something in the sand, only to see the waves wash it away seconds later. It was as if I was talking to someone from the other side of time. Jack watched from afar, not wanting to invade that sacred space. But in his chest a silent urgency was rising, the need to understand. He no longer mocked, no longer laughed. Now he simply let himself be touched by the sad beauty of that woman who seemed to be talking to the sea. One morning, while walking along the pier, Jack found something between the wooden planks, a small shell with a blue ribbon tied to it, and inside it a folded piece of paper. Carefully he opened it. The handwriting was delicate, and the words seemed to have been written from the heart. If someone ever finds this, know that love is not lost at sea. It changes shape and returns with the tides, lighter, more serene. Jack stood still, staring at the horizon. It was the first time I had cried in many years. He didn't know if the note was for him, if it was an old remnant of Alice's past, or just another message left by chance, but those words passed through him like a cold and at the same time purifying wave. In the following days, Jack began to talk more with the old people in town, with the older fishermen who still remembered the storm that took Addison Carter, with the woman at the grocery store who said that Alice waited for weeks on the beach, refusing to believe that her husband's body would ever be found, and with the priest who had said that she had lost more than a love. She had lost a part of herself. Each account was a small clue, a fragment of what the sea had left behind. Jack began to understand that Alice's silence was not absence, it was resistance. It was the way she found to stay alive even when everything had fallen apart. One late afternoon, as the sky turned lilac, Jack decided to go to the beach. The wind was blowing lightly, and he walked to the exact spot where he had seen her leave the wooden box days before. The sand still held subtle markings, a pattern of shells, a heart-shaped stone. It was then that he realized there was something half buried in the sand, brought in by a recent tide. He reached down and pulled carefully. It was a photograph, wet, faded, but still visible. Alice and Addison, laughing by the sea, covered in foam and sun. Jack held the photo for a long time, his eyes welling up with tears. It felt like a gift from the sea itself, as if it wanted to give something back, even if it was too late. The next day, he went to Alice's house. When she opened the door, he said nothing. He just held out the photograph. For a moment, she stood still. Then he put his hand to his mouth and cried. Jack wanted to say 1,000 things, but no words would be enough. So he stood there, just present, as if his presence said, "I understand." Alice invited him in. The room was lit by the afternoon sun. There were flowers on the table, and the scent of chamomile tea filled the air. She sat down and looked at the photo fondly. He said that image was the last memory he had before the storm. That Addison had gone out to sea that morning, promising to return before sunset, and never returned. He also said that every year on the same day, the sea brought something back, a shell, a piece of wood, a souvenir of some kind, and that, to her, this was the sea's way of saying that he was still there somewhere. Jack listened to her in silence. No words seemed sufficient in the face of such delicacy. He understood that the sea, somehow, held not only Alice's secrets, but also her promises. When he said goodbye, the sky was already dark, but something inside him had lit up. For the first time, Jack felt that the sea was also speaking to him and telling him not to run away from what his heart feels. That night, the sound of the waves seemed calmer, as if the ocean itself had found peace. But fate still had one last twist in store, something Jack could never have imagined. When the sea gives back what it took, the dawn of that day arrived differently. The wind was colder, the sea rougher, seagulls circled restlessly, and mist obscured the horizon. Jack, as he had been for the past few weeks, woke up early. He was no longer the same man who had mocked his neighbor. Something in him had changed, and it had all started with that notebook left on the beach. From then on, he spent his days observing Alice from afar, trying to understand who she really was. He noticed that she sometimes talked to herself, looking out to sea, or left flowers on the rocks near the lighthouse. But that day, Alice didn't show up. Jack waited for hours, first on the porch, then on the beach. The wind pushed the waves closer and closer to his feet, as if the sea wanted to tell him a secret he wasn't yet ready to hear. It was then that he spotted something floating among the waves, a small bundle of blue fabric. She ran over, feeling the cold salt bite her ankles. She picked up the object, and her heart raced. It was the handkerchief Alice wore every morning. He was soaking wet, smelling of sea air and tears. Jack looked around, shouted her name, but only the sound of the waves answered. The whole city started talking. "Alice is gone," some said. "He left without telling anyone," said others. But Jack knew, deep down, that she wouldn't leave like that. She loved that place, that sea, that silence. That night, unable to sleep, he walked to the lighthouse, the same one where she used to leave flowers. The cloud-covered moon barely illuminated the path. When he arrived, he saw something that made him stop breathing for a moment, the notebook. The same blue notebook with dry pages lay on a stone. Jack opened it with trembling hands. The first pages were filled with notes he already knew, poetic phrases, vague memories, drawings of the sea. But in the last ones, there was something new. A letter. Jack, maybe one day you'll understand why I chose silence. It's not always the absence of a voice. Sometimes it's the only way to keep a memory alive without destroying it. I lost my son here, in this sea that I love so much. He was 8 years old. It was a morning like any other, and I was distracted for a moment. Since then, the sound of the waves has never been the same for me. When you laughed at me, I didn't feel angry. I saw in you what I myself once was, someone trying to hide the pain behind the noise. I hope that one day silence will also teach you something good. If one day the sea returns what it took, maybe I can smile again. Jack's hands were shaking. He reread each line, his chest tight, his heart racing. The memories of the laughter, the jokes, the times he called her the crazy woman with the bread and the blue scarf came like silent stabs. He knelt before the stone and wept. He cried for her, for the boy he never knew, for himself. She cried because she realized, too late, that Alice's silence was the echo of what the sea had taken from her, and that empathy is the sound most missing when the world falls silent. Suddenly, a noise made him look out to sea. Something glinted in the dim moonlight. A small wooden boat was being pushed by the tide, drifting slowly toward the shore. Inside it, wrapped in a blanket, was an old toy, a small wooden boat with the name Thomas engraved on the side. Jack stood still. It was the name of the son Alice had mentioned. The sea had somehow returned what it took, not in flesh, but in memory. And in that moment, Jack understood. Maybe she hadn't disappeared. Maybe she had just gone to find the thing she loved most. The next morning, the entire city was filled with a rare stillness. The blue scarf was found tied to the wooden cross near the lighthouse, swaying in the wind as if dancing. Jack took care of that place every day, leaving flowers in the same spot where Alice used to leave them. He never made fun of anyone again, and whenever the sound of the sea grew louder, he would smile with teary eyes, murmuring to himself, "Now I understand, Alice. Now I understand the power of silence." The sea remained the same, but Jack was no longer there. And in that small town, surrounded by salt and memories, Alice's name became a legend whispered by the waves. The woman who taught a man to listen to what his heart keeps silent. The sound that remains after the silence. The following days were strangely calm. The coastal city seemed suspended in time, as if even the wind had decided to speak more quietly. Alice did not return, but her absence was in everything, in the smell of bread that no longer spread in the mornings, in the empty chair in front of the blue house, in the murmur of the sea that seemed to call her by name. Jack was different. People noticed. The previously talkative and mocking man now greeted people kindly, helped his neighbors, and listened more than he spoke. But no one knew what was going on inside him, that light weight of regret mixed with gratitude, like someone who learns late but really learns. He continued to visit the lighthouse every day, even when the sky threatened rain. She cleaned the stones, changed the flowers, and read aloud passages from Alice's notebook, as if each reading could bring her back a little. One morning, while collecting shells scattered on the sand, he encountered an elderly woman walking slowly. She watched him for a while, then approached. "You're her neighbor, aren't you?" he asked, his gaze sweet but curious. Jack nodded. "Yes, she was my neighbor." The woman sighed, looking at the sea. "I knew her. I worked at the hospital when her boy was brought in. I never forgot that day." Jack knelt down, feeling a lump in his throat. "Did she say something?" The lady nodded. "He said the sea only takes what it wants to teach. That one day it will give back, but not in the way we expect." Those words remained engraved in him like an echo. That night, on his way home, Jack opened the notebook again and noticed something glued to the back of the last page. An old, faded photo. It was Alice, young, smiling with the boy at her side, both holding the same little boat that the sea had returned. Behind the photo, a handwritten phrase, "When the tide goes out, look at the lighthouse." Jack's heart raced. The next day, before dawn, he walked to the lighthouse. The wind was blowing hard, whipping up sandstorms. Upon arriving, he saw something he had never noticed before. Among the rocks, hidden under moss and shells, was a small iron box. With effort, he opened it. Inside, he found old letters, kept in yellowed envelopes, all addressed to the same name, Thomas Blake. The sun, and along with the letters, a small diary, older than the notebook. In the pages, Alice told the story she never had the courage to share with anyone. She spoke of her husband, a sailor who had disappeared on the high seas, of her son, who out of curiosity wanted to see the lighthouse up close and fell on the rocks, of the day the sea took everything except hope. She had written, "With every sunrise, I leave flowers at the lighthouse, not to mourn what I lost, but to remember what the sea taught me. Love doesn't die, it just changes shape." Jack closed the diary, his face wet. Whether it was rain or tears, he couldn't tell. He looked at the horizon, and for the first time since she left, he felt Alice's silence not as absence, but as presence. It was as if the sound of the waves was her voice, saying the words he needed to hear. "It's okay, Jack. Now you understand." And he understood. He understood that some people come into our lives just to teach us to listen to what the whole world insists on keeping quiet, that laughter without empathy is the echo of an unhealed pain, and that sometimes forgiveness is not asked for, it is experienced. In the days that followed, Jack began to write. She used the same notebook, now with new pages. She told the story of herself, the boy, the sea, and how a woman's silence changed a man's heart. When he finished, he took the notebook to the lighthouse and left it on the rock where the blue scarf had previously rested. The wind blew hard, turning the pages to the first one, where he had written a single sentence, "Not all who remain silent do so out of weakness." The same phrase that one day made him stop on the sand. That night the lighthouse shone brighter, and to anyone passing by the beach there seemed to be two shadows standing side by side before the sea, one tall and silent, and the other with the blue scarf fluttering in the wind. The sea had returned what it had taken, but what remained was even stronger. The certainty that love, when true, always finds a way to return, when silence becomes eternity. The sun rose slowly over the coastal city. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the sea reflected each ray like a calm mirror. Jack walked alone on the sand, feeling the breeze touch his face, and the silence fill his heart. The lighthouse remained there, firm as always. But now, on the stone where the notebook and blue handkerchief had previously rested, there were small white flowers. It was as if the ocean itself had sealed Alice's presence forever. He knelt down and placed his hand on the ground. She felt the wind play with her hair, heard the sound of the waves, and realized her silence had never been empty. It was full of stories, love, pain, hope. And now finally he could hear it. Jack smiled, tears in his eyes. The man who once mocked, who didn't understand the value of others, now carried something that no one could steal: empathy. I learned that each person harbors invisible battles, that every act of kindness is a treasure, and that life, even when cruel, always offers a way to give back what matters. The sea continued to crash against the rocks, soft and steady, and Jack knew that Alice, even though physically absent, remained there, in the wind, in the waves, in the memory of those who allowed themselves to feel. He stood up and looked at the horizon. The sun was already illuminating the entire city, and in the golden glow, He felt a peace he never imagined he would find. In everyone's hearts, the memory of a woman who, with silence and courage, taught the power of empathy and hope remained. And Jack promised to honor that every day, living with kindness, patience, and attention to the details that often make all the difference. The lighthouse continued to shine, guiding not only the boats at sea, but also the hearts that learned to listen to the silence. Have you ever experienced something similar? What has the silence of someone important taught you? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends.